Welcome, everyone, to Ensendero, your podcast for everything having to do with startup business culture. We have our two hosts here, myself, David Favela. I'm the CEO of BorderX Brewing, director of the Talent Foundry at UCSD, and we have Marco Castillo.
Marco Castillo, San Diego, Californian here, producer, designer, all of the above.
Man about town.
Man about town, yeah. I'm happy to be here, though. I mean, this is exciting what we're doing. So, I mean, David, why don't you just start us off, tell everybody what is it that we're doing here today?
Yeah, so today we're kicking off our project called Ensendero, and it's really about thinking and revolutionizing our startup mindset. So I do coaching for startups at UCSD. I work with biotechs, life sciences, and I work with a lot of folks from diverse backgrounds, African Americans, Latinos, Latinas, veterans, etc. And what I've learned over the last 2 years, in my own experience as well, is that our chances of success are in a large part determined by the ideas and the mindset we have. Yeah. Sometimes we limit ourselves because we have limiting mindset ideas. Sometimes we don't even know what the right first step is to take. And so Ensendero is really about lighting the path, showing the way, and guiding us forward and collectively as a community, because I think it's time that we start talking about this. I don't believe there's anyone out there today who's got this mission that we're embarking on to really bring the best of startup culture, of startup mindset, so that we can increase the chances of success for all the Latinos and Latinas out there.
Yeah, I mean, the chance of success isn't very high when you don't have many chances to fail.
Correct. And you know what blows...
So yeah, I mean, talk about that, please. Like, what is it about failure that's so important here?
Failure. Well, there's a variety of thoughts about failure. If you're from Silicon Valley, it's actually considered a badge of honor. It means you took a chance. It didn't pan out, but that's okay, because going through that process, you learned a lot. It doesn't mean the end of your career. It doesn't mean the end of your life. In our case, when you come from a background of limited resources, where you've been able to put enough capital together to try something new and it fails, it is a bit devastating. There isn't a second, third, or fourth chance, because sometimes you walk out of that traumatized. You're kind of like, I put all my effort, capital, and energy into this, and it just didn't work out. And I find that unacceptable. And in fact, there's a number out there that a lot of people consider common knowledge that, 95% of startups fail. I don't accept that. I think that's an awful waste of our community, our talent, our treasure. And I think something has to be done to take that number down. It won't go to zero. I'm not a crazy utopist, but it needs to be better. And I think that's something all of us can get around.
Well, that's why a lot of Latinos don't start up, right? It's the fear of failure.
Oh, it's terrifying.
Or they've failed and then they don't have any resources left.
Correct.
To try again.
Correct. So all those things are correct. You're fearful. You've been told your whole life that the best thing to do is el camino seguro. Get a good paying job, buy a home, start a family, and just focus on that. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not
break
arguing.
Your back along in the process too.
yeah, oftentimes. But I think we need to think differently. I think when you're young and you still don't have all those commitments, you are in an ideal position to try new things. And try to be the boss. Don't be the employee. Try to explore avenues where you can bring your ideas, your talent, your capital to work and develop new ideas, because these are transformational. The difference between a job and being an entrepreneur is that having a job, you're always at the whim of the economy, of your boss, of others in your organization as to whether you continue moving forward or not. But when you're the boss, you are able to really test your ideas in a way that is not possible sometimes in a work environment. And if you succeed, you create what's called generational wealth. You've actually created something that can continue beyond yourself, something that you can pass on to your children.
I can attest to that. I started a business back in 2012. I had a couple partners, and things went sour on the 4th year, right when we were making it big.
Yeah.
They seem to have gone along and moved along. You know, we're different cultures, you know. Whereas I did kind of hurt a little bit as far as emotional baggage.
Yeah.
The emotional baggage was big.
Mm-hmm.
Financial stress. You know, luckily, I was smart enough to get a job at a university, and I got a master's degree along that process. But even after getting your master's degree, you know, first of all, that's a big expenditure.
Yeah.
You spend a lot of money doing that. And then once you're done, you're still at the whim of life. You still have to think about what are you going to do to get ahead, start a business.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's where I'm at right now is starting fresh.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, I'm 42 now.
Mm-hmm.
I wish I would have started fresh, you know, 3 or 4 times when I was in my 20s.
Yeah.
Didn't pan out that way. But is there ever a time where it's too late?
It's never too late. The best time to start a business, I think I've heard, and it's a little cliched, is 20 years ago or today. Those are the 2 best times to start a business. And you can't change the past, but you can take action towards the future. And what I want Ensendero to be about is how do we create a path for folks, even with limited economic resources, even those folks who have gone through challenges of starting a business and not having it work the first time, to be able to come back up and attempt it again, but this time to take all their learning that they had from that experience, plus what we can provide them with in terms of best practices, so that they have a higher probability of success. I want to be clear, no one can promise you 100% guarantee of success, but I always speak in terms of probability, right? So if there are things we can do, things we can teach you, that if you follow will increase your probability of success, I see that as a huge win. And that's what I want Ensendero to be about.
Okay, so Ensendero's really helping take people's failures and turn it around, or helping people to just not fail at all as well, right?
I think a failure is always a learning opportunity of what doesn't work. But I'd like to avoid those lessons as much as possible. They're hugely traumatic financially, emotionally, in other ways. And so what Ensendero champions is really a set of best practices that we've leveraged from Silicon Valley and other high-tech startups, built around what's called Lean Startup Methodology by Eric Ries, as well as Stephen Blank's customer discovery and business startup practice. And what Lean talks about is really not putting everything on the line the first moment you start your business. I think that's one of the worst mindsets out there right now, is most people think, I need money, and once I get the money, I'm just going to put it to work. I'm going to sign leases. I'm going to hire people. I'm just going to go for it because I have a brilliant idea. And what Lean argues is don't do that. And don't be so arrogant about your brilliant idea. Take a step back and follow these series of steps to create evidence that your idea actually has traction. And through these different activities that you do, you create more and more evidence so that the probability of success gets higher and higher and higher. In fact, many people don't know, I started BorderX using Lean Startup Methodology, and I hope in a future episode of our podcast we can go through in detail of exactly the set of experiments I made to ensure that I was trying to minimize risk as much as possible.
Okay, yeah, I mean, one of the things that we could probably address, since we are, I wanted to kind of start off this conversation a little bit talking about the traumas and the challenges, because I think it's important that we frame that first in order for Ensendero to really become, tangible in people's minds. Yeah. Because the first thing they're going to think about is the problems that they're facing. Oftentimes it's very easy to get lost in the weeds, right? That's a saying. You see you're stuck in the trees and not in the forest. You don't see the forest because you're so, you're in it. You're in it. Yeah. What are some of the challenges that you've perhaps faced with BorderX? Some of the challenges that made you kind of reassess maybe some of the things that you're doing?
That's a great question. I originally started BorderX with no expectations. I was working at that time at Hewlett Packard. My brother was at Solar Turbines, and his two sons were also working corporate jobs. And we originally just wanted to do the business for fun, right? We'll make enough beer, we'll create new recipes, and people will come, and we'll make enough money to pay rent, and that was great. That was it. That didn't last more than the first day of opening. I still remember when we rolled up that iron curtain at the industrial park we were in Otay Mesa, there was already a line of 50 people wanting to come in. And they did. And they came in, and our tiny inventory within a couple of days was gone. Like, what the heck? Why are people coming? But it gave me insight into, I had stumbled upon a problem. Right? So the thing about Lean Startup is it's always focused on solving a problem. And I realized the reason people were coming is for two reasons. No one thought that Latinos liked craft beer. And they do. So no one was serving Latino craft beer to the community. And two, because Latinos form a majority in the South Bay, no one had made major investments in creating craft breweries in the South Bay. So in a way, it was like a brewery desert. Right? And so we stumbled upon this thing, and I said, oh, maybe this isn't a hobby. Maybe this is actually a business, and I owe it to myself to at least explore, well, how big of a business and how could we go about growing it. And we started doing that, and within 2 months, I was actually opening up a tap room here in Barrio Logan, and it kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So I think I probably executed Lean Startup in a really good, solid way because I was making small bets that gave me more and more confidence that I could make bigger bets, right? Probably one of the areas where I got caught, and it's not uncommon, a lot of the companies I work with get caught in that space, which is they stay too long in this revenue generating space where they have no capital plan, no growth strategies. They just kind of found themselves with an idea that they're able to execute. All of a sudden they're making decent money, but they're not sure where to go next. And so the one thing I would do to improve my chance of success would have been two. One is our accounting was not where it needed to be. And I think if you don't have a very solid accounting system, you don't know your profitability. And it's not that I didn't have fancy Excel spreadsheets and I was tracking everything and making, my own assessments. I didn't have a professional accounting firm that was doing the professional analysis to give me the insights into my business. So I was kind of flying blind. And that's something I've helped my startups is make sure that you start laying the foundation of a good business from the very beginning.
The financials, I mean, that can easily destroy the business, and it's one of the hardest things to wrap your head around if you're not comfortable with finances.
Yeah.
That's also one of the reasons why I had closed my business. I saw months in advance that the books were not good, that if we didn't really do something in the next couple of months, that something bad was going to happen. And, at that time, it kind of felt like I was a lone voice. But sure enough, that time came, and we had to close the doors. So it served though as a good learning experience because that did give me a lot of reasons to not start certain businesses because I've had a lot of ideas since then. But one thing that Lean has taught me, speaking to you, is that you don't focus on the idea necessarily. You focus on
the problem.
Exactly.
That's the number one lesson that I use with all of my startups is they think they have the brilliant idea. And sometimes they do. I don't dispute it. But if they're the only one who thinks it's a brilliant idea and no one else does, you should be curious enough to go, well, why is that? Am I so brilliant no one understands me? Or is it maybe my idea doesn't make sense? Maybe I don't even understand the problem I'm solving. It just seems like a great thing. It's very funny with my biotech startups. They're scientists. They're PhDs. They're doing experiments. And they suddenly see a phenomena in their experimental results, and they're like, this is the thing. I just discovered something. And they file a patent, and they get the patent, and it seems like the world is their oyster. But it's kind of like they never even figured out, okay, well, what's that for? That thing you discovered, this thing that you patented, who wants it? How do they want it? What would they pay for it? Like, there's all these things that they just skipped completely. And so what I try to make sure we all do is you got to go back no matter how brilliant you are or how smart
Mm-hmm.
or what you patented, you go back to the very beginning and say, who would want to buy this? And what is the problem they're having? Is it a big problem? Is it a small problem? And is it something, and then in that process of conducting, this is called customer discovery, your idea gets better and better with every person you meet because all of a sudden you're learning things. You're like, wait a second, so you do have this problem, but it also has this feature or this aspect, and I hadn't even thought about that. And you go back to your solution and your design, you integrate that feedback and you tweak it so now you're better matched to what your customers want. And if you do this enough, and then you go through what's called an MVP cycle where you try something new, test it, collect the results, and then come back and say, am I on the right track? You do that enough and you get what's called product market fit. It's like the holy grail.
Right.
It's the moment where you're like, you know what? I really do have a brilliant idea. And not only do I think it's a brilliant idea, I talk to the people who have the problem. I created a solution.
Mm-hmm.
I experimented multiple cycles to get to this point, and they all love it, or the majority love it, some degree of success. And that's the moment that you've got the brilliant idea, and now you can start working on other aspects of your business to begin the commercialization process.
The process just to get there, it makes a lot more sense when you're looking at the problem, because you can have a great idea, but trying to prove that is nearly impossible because the process doesn't really work that way. You can easily go and ask somebody, what problems are you facing? And
Yeah.
they can give you a list of problems they're facing, whereas you have an idea and say, what's the problem with this? You know, it's almost impossible to answer that. Why are we really focusing on startups? We could easily try to help people who haven't started up yet, right? Who,
Yeah.
or people who already have been in business for a couple of years. Why focus specifically on startups?
I wanted to focus on startups because it's the one thing that can change things dramatically. Whether you have an existing business or whether you're starting from scratch, there's this process where you constantly have to refresh. In the case of having a business, your business concept, time change, customer demand changes, problems change, new competition arises. And so you have to have this kind of mindset where you're like, hey, am I still solving that problem that customers had in the way they wanted me to? Or have those customers changed, and do I have to go back and change? So in startup terms, that's kind of called the pivot. And the pivot is about, okay, I'm not going to throw everything away about who I am and what I've created, but I do want to pivot it in a way where it's better attuned and it's better connected to what the consumer trends are.
Always be pivoting.
Always be pivoting, as they
Yeah.
say. But I wanted to answer the question of a more personal way. The reason Ensendero means so much to me, and the reason why startups mean so much to me, is I think that our community has been at the whim of the economy, right? And what I mean by that is, if you look at my father's story, he is an economic refugee. He came from Durango, where he was a farmer in the mountains of Durango. He ran cattle, he grew corn, beans, and all that. It was before birth control, so he had a family of 8. And so it was a lot of
I'm
mouths
catching
to
up. I'm
feed.
catching up.
Yeah. And, he had some land, and, it should have been a good life. But in the 50s and 60s, after World War II, the price of commodities like corn fell through the floor.
Yeah.
So growing and selling corn on the open market wasn't even an option anymore. No one would give you what you used to be able to get for it during, World War II and whatnot.
Was that because they were buying corn now from other countries? Was that?
It was because the world stopped focusing on war and started focusing on production.
Oh, I see.
And they were applying new sciences like chemistry for increasing yield, artificial fertilizers, and more mechanized equipment, especially in the United States. That's really when
Making it cheaper, basically,
it
right?
made it just dirt cheap. And, it affected so many countries in Latin America, like Argentina, that used to be a powerhouse in the 50s. And because the price of their principal export, corn and wheat and other things like that, and beef, it just fell through the floor. And so their economy contracted. But in my particular case, in my family story, And I think it's common to a lot of folks from Mexico or Central America, is that it was no longer viable to support your family just by growing plants and crops and having cattle and chickens and all of that, because they still needed medical care.
Yeah.
You still needed a truck, started becoming absolutely vital. So what happened is these economic refugees, and I don't mean that at all in a bad way, I'm just saying they're reacting to what's happening to them. And what happened to them is they had to start immigrating to the United States, first on a seasonal basis, which happens to a lot of us, or a lot of our family stories, is they would come for the growing season. They would pick crops. They would be part of that migrant workforce. And then they would send money back to their families. And that worked for a while until that didn't work anymore, at least in our particular case, because leaving your young wife with her hands full. At that time, I think my father had 3 or 4 boys, and it was just a handful. And so that really concerned him. So he immigrated her here to San Diego, and was able to provide for them by working in construction. It was a good paying job, a union job, and it created a safe and stable environment for us. And all of us went to college because of that. So what I'm trying to say is, because my father was able to find employment, to make these transitions because he was an economic refugee, yes, we gave up the land and the lifestyle of Mexico, which I love dearly. I used to go back all the time.
Yeah, Mexico's nice.
Yeah, but we just had to install some stability. And the thing is, I don't think people realize, or maybe they do, that your ability to get a good paying job, your ability to start a business and create generational wealth are perhaps 2 of the most important things that determine the quality of life for yourself and the quality of life for your family, and overall the quality of life for your community and your state and the nation that you live in. So I want to use Ensendero as a platform to help improve people's ability to control their economic destiny by giving them the skills, the tools, the case studies, the insights, so that they can begin adjusting their own mindsets to make the most of wherever they are, doing whatever they're doing. And I think in Ensendero, that is something I want to dedicate my life to.
Well, I mean, it's in the name, right? Like Ensendero, so encender.
Yep.
Ensendero. So encender means light.
Yes.
And then path. So it's all about lighting the path for people. It's one of the things that really attracts me to this brand is that, I've got 20 years of experience now in marketing and design, and I came to the conclusion that my mission in life is to help other people succeed.
Yeah.
So working on Ensenderos really vibes with what I do. It aligns with where I'm at in my career. And I can see this going a lot of different places. Where would you say you'd like to see Ensenderos in 10 years?
That's a great question. I guess I start with my objective, which is I want to help as many young or older Latinos and Latinas to think about their lives from a different perspective, to discard these ideas that they've picked up through popular media around how to make it in today's society, how to start a business. A lot of this is misinformation. And I want to substitute that with really solid, grounded information about what they can do to either start a business or to improve their careers using some of this methodology. And so if that's my goal, where I'd like to see us in 10 years is I want to get that message out there, and I want to put it in people's hands. So social media is going to be a really important platform for us. YouTube's a big, important platform. But I've also realized that we have to live and operate in the real world. So I want to see if we can create conferences, chapters, or support groups of people who are helping each other kind of absorb this new information and to change their lifestyles for the better. So I want to be a force. And I know it's a simplified way of thinking about it, but a force that affects the largest possible number of our community so that we can succeed together.
Still about community.
Yes.
Community,
always.
Unity. It really begs to question like the challenges. Our community faces very specific challenges. um, generational challenges. And you kind of addressed it a little bit where, we're taught to just work hard.
Yeah.
So what is it that you think that we should be taught nowadays? Is it to think hard? Is it to, I mean, what do you think it should be?
Oh my God. I am guilty, number one, of adopting the échale ganas mentality. My father is an incredible workhorse. He could, even if I think in his 60s, he worked construction, he could still outwork me at my prime. And I was like a collegiate wrestler out there pouring concrete on a hot summer day, and he was just shoveling, these 30-pound shovels of cement all over the place. And I do that for 5 minutes, and I'm gassed.
Yeah.
So I got inspired, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I love my father. He's been kind of a guiding light for me. But the one thing that I think I didn't get from him was not only work hard, mijo, but work smart. And it's not his fault. No one gave him those tools to think about how to work smarter.
Right.
I think he went through life with a lot of opportunities given to him. Some he took, some he didn't even realize were right in front of him. And in retrospect, our lives could have been so different had we made different choices as a family. So what I want to focus on is helping people work smarter. We already have the échale ganas culture. Now let's échale inteligencia, échale más sabiduría, échale insight. We've got to come up with another alternative, which is work smart. Here are some tools to work smarter.
Yeah, I remember the first time I heard that term. I had an employee who told me one time, "No, I work smarter, not harder," and it was like almost like a slap to the face to me because I'm over here breaking my back. But yeah, maybe that's for the next podcast. Try to figure what that's gonna be because that's gonna take some thought. I mean, that could be a complete motto, tagline, call to action.
Yeah.
Our people need that inspiration.
Definitely. And, I want to add a real tangible example. So I went to college in Chico State, and we were given the opportunity to purchase the home that we were renting. And I asked the owner how much he wanted for the house, and he said $50,000 owner carried. You don't even have to go get a bank loan. It was just, let's sign some paperwork, make monthly payments, which, by the way, was lower than our rent. And I became a homeowner at, 19 or 20.
Wow, nice.
Yes, and it was fantastic. I was able to put the capital together with our we bought it. I lived there for 2 years, graduated, and then thought, well, we can sell it for 85, so $35,000, profit margin. It's not bad.
Yeah.
And I did, and then we moved on.
Hindsight.
Yeah, in hindsight, the échale ganas mindset was, it was easy money. Like, no, you got to work hard for your money. There is no such thing as easy money.
Yeah.
And yet, even when I had easy money because of this property that we invested in, it never occurred to me that I could make that a career or a business strategy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of people often are at the very cusp of like, hey, by the way, if you get really good at this thing that you just stumbled upon, you might actually be able to make way more money than working for someone else.
Yeah.
And it never occurred to me. And I look at my father too, and I could tell you just stories and stories about how opportunity literally slapped us in the face and we let it go by. And I want to make sure that, we change our mindset. And part of changing our mindset is developing a different perspective of where the opportunities are, and then having the confidence to test those strategies. And then if they work, go for it. Go big.
Well, in the term generational wealth, it takes a generation. It takes generations to build wealth, and that's one thing that I think my family stumbled on is that it took generations to lose wealth, and it's going to take generations to get it back. So my dad bought a house, a duplex, in 2007, right before the housing crisis. So his price of his house went down like more than a third.
Yeah.
He got really depressed, and he had all these plans. He was going to fix it up, and he wanted to be a owner-renter.
Yeah.
And but he got really depressed because of that. And, it was one challenge. It was going to take 10 years to bounce back. But in those 10 years, he got to the age where he just didn't have the energy really to put into the house anymore. So what he decided was that, well, I'm going to pass it on to my son, which, he did. But hindsight, slaps you in the face. In reality, what we should have done was to put it in a trust,
Mm.
a living trust, so that we could have avoided taxes. But in just passing the house down to me, we lost tens of thousands of dollars just in taxes alone. And the benefit of all of that was that, working hard for the money is definitely an understatement, because you really have to work hard. I took some of the money from the home once the market, leveled out, and I added to it. I put a new roof on the house. I built an extension, all licensed. And now there's an opportunity for that to actually become a 3-unit property now.
Mm.
Uh, and I don't even know if I'm going to finish it, right? It may be up to my son to finish it.
Yeah.
But the plan is not to sell it.
Mm-hmm.
Keep it as long as possible, rent it out, and pass it to the next generation. Just in hopes that, generation wealth is going to take generations. It's going to take more than 2 generations, I think, So if we can just leverage one property to start another business too, would be great.
I agree, but I would challenge your thinking around multi-generational wealth takes generations. I think that's part of the challenge we have as a community is, and I think the new generation actually has a word for this, and to some degree I believe it. They call it a hack, right? It's some idea where they're able to generate, decent income or in some cases exceptional income, discovering some method to pursue. I think we have the opportunity to think differently and affect our economic well-being in a very short time frame. There's a gentleman. There's quite a few. One of the perks about doing my job at UCSD is I meet the most interesting people.
Yeah.
And one of the gentlemen who we're working with, he's a serial entrepreneur. He's flipped 5 companies, biotech, like in 10 years. So on average, he's flipping one every 2 years. And he just has a set of ideas about how he thinks about business and how he starts them. And I'll give you an example of one of his simplest ideas. He goes, David, I build these companies to sell them. How do I know they'll sell? I actually go to companies, larger companies that I want to sell to, and I ask them, I'm not going to the customer is still the customer, but I'm going to the companies I want to sell my company to, and I ask them what their problems are, what they would like to see in 2 years or 3 years, and I build this company to flip them. And I'm not guessing. I spoke to these other companies, so when I hit my numbers and people see the progress and success I've had, I sell the company to them. And he's sold, I don't know, $500 million worth of companies now. But it's such a simple idea, like build to flip a company. And how can you do it successfully, like time after time after time? Well, just talk to the people you hope will buy your company at some point. It really just comes down to that, is again working smarter, and I'm trying to challenge myself to do more of it, because I think for whatever reason our mindset collectively, and I don't know where it all comes from, it's part of its culture, part of its family, part of its friends. We got to break through this idea that our realities are fixed and there is no combination of ideas or concepts that will change them quickly. I think it will. And I think the better we're at that, the more successful we'll be as individuals, as families, and as communities.
Well, I had the idea of flipping this property. I managed to raise the value of it with, and it's just not the work that I did, but also the economy right now where it's at. Raise the value of the property 63%.
Yeah.
However, you do that and then you learn about capital gains tax. So that's where I'm at, whereas I would have liked to flip or consider it now, I feel tied to it. I feel like I have to be there at least 15 years to cut that tax in half. My tax guy tells me, the best thing to do is to trade it if you want to flip it. But I think real estate works a little bit different. I put a lot of money into it, though. Had I maybe thought more along the lines of starting a business that I can flip, I might have invested the money elsewhere.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think the lesson here, though, is perhaps don't look to that property as your multi-generational wealth. Look at it as a long-term investment that you're going to enjoy because you and your family are there and it generates revenue. But what I'm arguing is look outside of that, right? What are other opportunities that you're uniquely skilled at and prepared for to take advantage of? And again, it's that mentality of like, well, what are the problems that are out there? Who's having them? How could I possibly solve them? Right. And that's the crux of whatever new business strategy you create.
Definitely. I mean, they say real estate is one of the safest places to be at. However, the point that I really wanted to get at is the education part.
Yeah.
Finance part. Had I known about capital gains tax, had I known about, the transfer tax that we were going to have to pay,
sure,
we could have saved, close to, well, I don't want to say how much. It's a lot of money. We could have saved a lot of money. It takes an education, not just a good idea. Like, so, what do you tell people about continuing their education and learning more?
Oh, no, absolutely. Financial literacy is essential. I started earlier with the example, if I could go back in time, I would have done two things. I would have had a better accounting team to support me. And two, I would have put together what I call a capital plan, which is just simply how much money do I need? Because starting a brewery and growing a brewery takes a lot of capital. It's not, you don't look to your savings and say, oh, I'm going to buy, a decent brewing system is $300,000 to $500,000, plus the installation is another $100,000 or $200,000, plus all the other startups. So you're suddenly you're going from I'm a hobby brewer to like I'm a production brewer, and the numbers get huge. And I think if I could go back in time, I should have been smarter about my capital strategy of what capital I was going to access, where I was going to get it from, and how to manage those needs over time.
And how do you connect to these people?
Which people, the financial literacy folks?
Like, is it building a network? I mean, I guess that's kind of what Ensendero's trying to do, right? We're trying to build a network of professionals.
Yeah, I think you do have to have a relationship with a good accounting firm. There is this thing called a fractional CFO.
Right.
So a chief financial officer is actually the person that can answer those two questions best. Here's the accounting system. Here's our capital strategy. It's two of the most important things that they do to help you make better business decisions. And I mentioned fractional because you can hire a part of someone. You don't have to hire 100% of a CFO. It's very common now. So look, you have to have a network either through friends or family or a professional network or a paid-for network, but you can't ignore these things. To your point, you didn't have a good tax advisor, so you weren't sure on how exactly to manage this potential liability. There might be solutions you may not even be aware of right now that someone else knows, but we've got to go out and find out who. I have challenges in my business today that I don't feel like I still have good knowledge. So what I say is, when you start a business, you do have to have a problem. You do have to have a good solution. But once you've attained those things, I mentioned about building the rest of your company. That's what I referred to, building out the infrastructure. Who am I hiring? Do I need HR support? What's my accounting system? Do I do it myself? Do I hire a company? How will I get financial advice and tax advice? A CFO, a tax lawyer. So you really, to me, all I'm trying to say is first find a great idea or a great problem, solve it, test it, which is actually low cost. You're not signing leases, you're not hiring a team to do those first. Yeah, do those first things first. Because one of the biggest problems people have is they don't know the right sequence of steps to take. They're like, oh no, I got to sign a lease. I've got to hire people. I've got to, to them, building a business is just build it. Like tomorrow, start spending money, Yeah,
but it's almost not worth building when you fill your head with challenges. I mean, that's kind of what you do. You start thinking about all the problems. I have no money. I don't have the connections.
Yeah, and I would say don't worry about it yet.
Right.
I mean, I'm not saying that problem goes away, but if you don't have a good problem, a good customer to solve it for, and a good solution, the rest doesn't matter. But if you do, and you do go through this process, now we can talk about the where do I get investment dollars, but that's one of the things I think in our community we don't do well enough.
Right.
We don't do what's called due diligence, right? We use personal capital. Hey, Marco, loan me $20,000, please.
Right.
And Marco says, well, for what? Oh, I'm starting a startup. I'm going to do XYZ. And you're like, well, I like David. I don't know if I like him $20,000 worth. It sounds kind of risky. And I haven't given you any evidence that what I'm proposing is good for you or good for me. And I think as a society, as a community of Latinos, we have to get better of, helping each other out. But before helping each other out, you've got to do a good job on the due diligence. Now imagine I come to you and say, Marco, I came upon this problem. I've interviewed over 150 people who are having it. I built this prototype. I've done a few tests with 20, 30, up to 100 people now, and this is the feedback I've gotten. I've run the P&L. I've done the competitive market research. I need $20,000. It's not a guarantee we'll succeed, but you're in a better position to evaluate my idea so that you're not just, hey, it's David. He's got a great idea. I think it makes sense.
Right. Well, at that point, you can attract investors higher than those in your community, right?
Correct. And that's the set of limiting ideas we have as individuals is we think, I'll never be able to get that kind of money. Why even try? Look, we need to get better at finding good problems, testing the solutions, creating evidence, and now you can go and start talking to people about raising money.
How much of this do you think is fear-based thinking? Because from my experience, you're reading on a lot of Simon Sinek.
Yeah.
He makes the argument about fear-based decision making.
Yeah.
At least I think it was him, but it was backed up by what I learned at USD. Nothing good ever comes out of making decisions when you're afraid.
Correct.
And if we're afraid to start a business because we don't have the capital, we're just not going to make good decisions regardless.
Correct.
So how much of this does faith come into play? Faith in yourself, faith in your idea?
Another great question. I guess I would say as little as possible. Create, and what I mean by that is, to me, there's almost like a substitution of evidence versus faith. And I think that when I proposed to you to give me a loan for $20,000, I was asking you to take that on faith and relationship.
Right.
So it was 100%, all right? And then in the alternative scenario, I said, no, look, I've done due diligence. I've talked to 150 customers. Some of them have even signed letters of intent. Look, they're right here. I've created a prototype at my own expense. I tested that prototype. I've created a world of evidence. So your faith now is 20% versus 80% of my evidence. I'm not coming to you with faith or trust.
Right. Now you build the science behind it.
The science of the startup. I love that concept because that's what it is. Creating evidence that what you're proposing is going to make sense and has a high probability of success.
Well, I mean, it sounds like both of them could be tied in together, because once you go through the process and you prove to yourself that it's possible,
Yep.
or you're getting one more,
Yep.
you start building faith and momentum in your own ideas.
Correct.
So maybe rather than putting the faith first, you put the science first.
Yes.
And build on that faith.
100%. You got it.
That's interesting.
You got it. And the faith, I kind of equate sometimes to risk, right? Faith means I don't know, I don't have any evidence, and I'm just going to risk this, and it's very risky. But I have faith, right? And I want to have as little faith as necessary to move forward. If I ask people for faith, it'd mean one thing: have faith in the process.
Mm-hmm.
Have faith that as you move forward, if customers start telling you, oh, I don't like that, your prototype not solving my problem, I wouldn't pay for that. My problem isn't that big. You're trying to charge me $50, I'd pay $5. Have faith that you see this information and you go, you know what, I'm going to trust this process, and it's telling me this idea is not a good idea. I'm going to either change my solution or I'm going to go look for a better problem to solve.
Well, lean is proven, right?
Yes.
So many different organizations have used lean to get their message across. So I guess I see it as hand in hand. In order to launch a business, you need to, maybe faith is the wrong word, you need to trust. You need to have a sense of trust that what you're doing is going to be successful, especially if you have a lot to risk. You have family, you have kids, you have your home, You don't want to just start off and lose it. So, you know, I can see what Lean is asking people to do is to trust the process.
Totally.
And I mean, what kind of companies off the top of your head that have made it use Lean?
Most of the high-tech companies that have succeeded in the market today have used Lean.
All of these unicorns that we see.
Yes. So my reference is there's an organization in Silicon Valley called Y Combinator. They have one of the most incredible track records of startups. I'm talking about Airbnb, Uber, like a lot of the most incredible companies have started there. And they start off by using, in fact, I believe Eric Ries, who's the author of Lean Startup, kind of compiled all his insights and learnings from working at Y Combinator to provide this insights in kind of a more cohesive manner. And yeah, I mean, if you go, so Y Combinator gets, I believe, 40,000 applicants per year or session.
Wow.
For their program, because they actually do give you money. Like if you go through the program, I believe it's a guaranteed 150,000, and if you keep successfully moving forward, I think there's another 350,000 for a total of $500,000 investment. But they take you through this process, and these investors ask the right questions. They use a term that can kind of be confusing. They say, you haven't demonstrated traction. And you can substitute that word traction with evidence. You haven't demonstrated any evidence that you're on the right track. And you haven't met with customers. You haven't developed a prototype. You haven't tested the prototype with a wider and larger group each time. So you're coming to me asking for another $500,000 on what? Faith? The market doesn't work that way. And I think that's something that we can take from Silicon Valley. We can begin to build our own culture here in the community of, I don't want anybody to take me on just faith alone. I want people to invest in me because the ideas I have are bigger than just my brain. They are evidence-based, they're real, there are customers out there, and I want people to look at that. And I think if we switch that mindset, more money will flow to our community, to our leaders who are starting these companies, so that we can have our own barrio Silicon Valley.
Well, maybe not even just starting a business, right? But what type of business? If you
Correct.
have more of a science and more of a trust in what you're doing, you may move beyond some of the businesses that are
Totally.
more common, right?
Yes. Yes.
Like, what are some of the common businesses you see people in our community starting that
I
maybe
thi-
don't have as much traction as they could?
I think the problem is... Oh, could you open the door for her? I think the problem is that we have, I guess, evidence in a different way that drives our community behavior. Now, I'll spell it out. What are the top 3 businesses that most Latinos start when they come to the United States? Lawn care, construction, and some food-related enterprise. You could capture, I'm guessing, 80 or 90% of our startups in our
Right there.
community fall into those 3 categories.
Right.
Very rarely do we go out of those 3. And why is that? It's because we've seen evidence, porque le fue bien a tu tío, a tu vecino. He started his construction, he started his lawn care, he started his roofing company. Like, we have the skill set, we've seen others succeed, and that's evidence in our mind. That evidence shows us that this could work. We don't know all the details, but we go out and we replicate.
Well, they're mostly service-based companies. But I guess what this challenges people to is, can you go beyond service, maybe products?
Absolutely, but we don't think that way. It's not even in our culture. It's not in our mindset. Hey, go invent something. ¿Qué? Invent? What's that? You know, patents, like, we don't even think in other terms because it doesn't exist in our minds. Like, there's no space for it. And we're not the only ones guilty of this. I mean, it's very common that certain communities latch on to certain industries because they see evidence that it works. So, for example, I'm not being racist here. I'm just talking about a dynamic. Nail shops.
I was about to say that.
Who owns a nail shop?
Yeah.
Vietnamese.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people, by the way, don't even know why Vietnamese own nail shops. Do you know the story behind this?
No, I don't.
Real quick, because there's a lot more interesting detail. There's actually a movie made about this. So when South Vietnam fell to the north, and they evacuated everyone, we had a ton of Vietnamese refugees. The wife of the former ambassador to Vietnam had developed really close links to the Vietnamese community, and so when she was here in the U.S., her heart went out to the people that were trying to restart their lives here, who had come from agricultural backgrounds, didn't have language, and she was very much into the, the aesthetic arts, hair, nails, makeup, and all of that. And she taught the first Vietnamese nail shop how to do nails and taught them the ropes of that business model. And guess what happened? They were successful, and the evidence to other Vietnamese were, that works. Let's go do that. Never would have thought about doing nails. I mean, it's a very foreign concept, but we're going to start a business doing nails. And now, again, just guessing, but 90% of the nail shops in the United States are managed by Vietnamese folks.
Yeah, and I mean, I grew up with a lot of Vietnamese friends out at City Heights, and a lot of them got into the aesthetic arts, and they're doing really well.
Yeah,
I mean,
great.
They followed that path, and it worked for them.
And the interesting thing is, because we talked about evidence, so to someone who's new in this community and they're seeing evidence that nail shops work, the other nail shop owners sometimes will show them the ropes and even lend them money so that they can start their nail shop in the community down the road.
No, and they're diversifying too. I mean,
yeah.
Somebody started doing nails, and then they do hair, and they do makeup, and permanent makeup now.
Yeah.
So there's more and more services that they're diversifying into, which, to me would make it more exciting, because thinking about having a nail salon, like, I would get bored from that quickly, but you diversify and you add services, you add value.
Yeah. No, and absolutely your revenue goes up, your profitability goes up, you can do a lot more. But my point was that for the person starting the business, all the evidence they needed was other people's success. Mm-hmm. And they go, okay, I have enough faith and confidence because they did it, I'm going to do it. It's a real powerful force. It happens in our community, happens in a lot of other ethnic communities. And the reinvestment occurs from the people who have capital, because they go, yes, she wants to start a nail shop down this road. There are no nail shops there. She'll be the first. I'll loan her money because I've seen evidence that it works. So she doesn't even have to put a fancy business plan together. The investors already saw that it works. And so capital flows more freely to ideas that have evidence that they're going to more than likely be successful.
The value of visualization, really, and mentorship.
Yeah.
Having somebody to look up to is huge. A lot of people in our community, though, have a challenge with that, too. Some of them grew out without a father.
Yeah.
Without a mother sometimes, which is probably worse. So just not having somebody there to look up to really traumatizes people.
Yeah.
For moving forward. So it's a big challenge. So I'm glad that we're getting together to try to address it, because maybe we can make a difference in people's lives.
I'm confident Ensendero will light the path for our community in terms of what right ideas, theories, and best practices can be put at work. And if we do our job well, it will become our cultural mindset for our community. Because I do think we can change it. I think the one we've had for centuries is not doing us any good, right? We're not thinking about startups. We're not thinking about our careers from the right perspective. And if we can change mindsets, we can change outcomes. And if you change outcomes and make them more positive, it's going to improve our entire community. And I think that's the thing that I find exciting about Ensendero.
I like the idea of connecting with people, honestly, like talking to people who have made it, even talking to people who have failed. I mean, there's so much to learn from everybody.
Yeah.
That's what I'm more excited about, and being able to help people to push beyond some of these boundaries that they often set for themselves.
Yeah.
We are coming close to the end of our podcast. There's something that you wanted to address here, a change agent. How are we going to be change agents?
So I kind of dislike the term entrepreneur. It's a French term for starter, like someone who starts something, entre, to begin. And there's another term called intrapreneur, which refers to those people who take a startup mentality in the corporate world. I was an intrapreneur when I was at Hewlett-Packard. And it was easy. There was so much opportunity, so many broken things and problems to solve that it was really easy for me to make a career at Hewlett Packard, taking this kind of approach. And I use the term change agent to maybe find a better term for both those things. A change agent, in my mind, really looks at society and the problems within our own communities. And by the way, it doesn't matter if you're a startup or a nonprofit. I think we all have the same goal. We're all trying to solve certain problems, and everything that I share will help you become better at both, whether nonprofit or whether for-profit. And whether you're doing a startup or whether you're working for a corporate environment, to me, change agent is someone who's really good at seeing problems, doing the due diligence, coming up with new alternative solution, and selling it either to their vice president or their board or to a customer, right? Or to investors. And it's the same skill set. I know for a fact because I did it at Hewlett Packard and here at BorderX. So I don't know if change agent is the right term. It's not as catchy, but it is descriptive of the culture we're trying to create.
I took a class in change management.
Yes.
And it blew my mind. So I get what you're saying. Like, once you can understand different ways of affecting how other people think about processes, about services, it can change how you do things. So I see the value. I think it may be a good segue into what our next episode could be about.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the idea here. I think we talked about doing a 12 series episodes where we talk about processes and how people can apply lean into their businesses.
Yep.
And being able to maybe also help people to become these change agents.
That's right.
So yeah, I'm excited. How do you feel about this so far? It's our first podcast. We had a couple of bumps and bruises along the way. But
No, I think this is great. It feels very organic, very natural. I'm excited to see where we can take it. I have done my work at UCSD, and it has made a difference. I have done volunteer sessions here at BorderX with the community, and I can see that this is a good problem to solve, and that I think our solution, which we're working on right now, which is this podcast and the following episodes, I'm excited to see what positive change we can make.
Yeah, me too. And let's get some guests in here. I want to talk to people and see what they have to say. So much value to be added. I love the fact too that we're here next to a big open window and we can see traffic. We can see a couple lowriders drive by. It's a great neighborhood. I think this is a great place to record. So, thanks for your hospitality. Obviously, this is your space. And is there anything that we didn't cover that you wanted to?
Oh, there's tons of things we haven't covered, but that's the beautiful thing. We have future episodes to go deeper and broader. So looking forward to creating more content, looking to find our voice, looking to see how we connect most effectively, looking to see how we tell stories. Stories are the most powerful mechanism for helping people understand and change. And so while we can talk about theory and best practices and all these other things like a checklist, until you tell it in a story format, it doesn't hit home yet. And so that's what I'm excited about, whether it's through our guests, whether it's through case studies, or whether it's other means. Telling stories is going to be our superpower.
Agreed.
All right.
Okay, well, you want to send us off?
All right. Thank you, everyone. Coming from BorderX Brewing here in beautiful Barrio Logan. Your co-host, David Favela, CEO of BorderX Brewing, director of the Talent Foundry at UCSD, and my fellow co-host, Marco Castillo.
Thank you. Yeah, I had a great time. Thanks, everybody, for joining us, and we'll do this again soon.
Sounds good. Thank you, everyone.